Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, November 11th, Veterans Day. November 11th, 2021. Time for another show. Time for, I don't know, more veterans. More discounts for veterans, I guess. Well, all right. You know, that's happening today. And I was reminded this morning, just thinking back, I guess, a year ago, was still Trump's responsibility to show up for Veterans Day. But he was in such a funk after finally being declared the loser in the election. He hadn't been seen in public since announcing that Joe Biden had won the election, calling the election for him, I think, on November 7th. And then nobody saw him, and then they realized, oh my God, you can't have the president not show up for Veterans Day. And so, poof, out of nowhere, with reporters who were covering the events guessing whether he was going to show up, he did materialize. I was just thinking about that today as I was reminded by our Twitter friend, Der Wouter, who remembered that, and it reminded me of the weirdness of the situation. And now thinking back on it, of course, knowing what we know now, imagine showing up at Arlington Cemetery at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and all of that. I imagine that was the event he actually went to. And doing so, already plotting to overthrow American democracy. That seems like you'd be torn in all that. But of course, not in his mind. Nothing tears him. He can think all sorts of contradictory things all at once, and not very well. Any single one of them as well. All right. Well, time for another show to roll on here. I'm trying to think about what the Twitter happenings are, except my Twitter feed is clogged with 4,000 likes, like literally 4,000 likes and 767 retweets of yesterday's, well, essentially encapsulation of what was going on in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial out in the middle of the country. Watching that, and of course you all would have seen some part of his performance on the stand in which he, varying reports about whether he cried in fact or pretended to cry. However, I was sort of struck by the look of the thing, whether he was pretending or not. It didn't matter for my purposes. I had just tweeted around, by the way, this is how the tough guy with guns thing goes, how it started versus how it's going. Here he is parading around in Kenosha with a rifle slung over his chest, walking around in the finger at the ready pose and directing people around as though he knew what he was doing. And then, of course, in the aftermath, the sad reality of gunplay is that eventually you might get held to account, and you have to either face up to your feelings about having done what you did and that it was wrong, or alternatively, fake having feelings of knowing it was wrong so that you don't get held to account by the jury. But in all respects, you still have to, in either case, you still have to show up and put on the show. It also reminded me, by the way, that this is what stand your ground laws are really actually aimed at. I know people have all sorts of other thoughts about what they might do and what they might, the effects they may have. But what they were looking for in Stand Your Ground, it's an affirmative defense that would allow you to bypass the whole procedure, not be charged at all, and not face trial either. It's a very weird sort of thing, just sort of pushing the whole process forward. If you believe you shot in self-defense, you should, of course, have no problem showing up in court and making that argument and saying that you shot in self-defense. But the Stand Your Ground law makes it so that you don't even have to get there. They just simply won't charge you from the beginning. They'll decide not to file those charges. And you won't have to put on the performance, whether it's real or otherwise. You won't have to face that moment where you have to appear to be remorseful, if not necessarily breaking down in tears, in public. That's what it's all about. They don't want you to have to go through putting on the show for everyone and pretending you're remorseful. You should just simply stand by it and assert your rights and leave it at that. And that's sort of what underlies the whole thing. I thought this was a great moment to point that out. Okay. Now a great moment, of course, to switch gears just before welcoming Greg. Well, we'll welcome Greg and say, hi, Greg. And he'll say hi, and go ahead. You can do that now. But you get the sense. I forgot to read Bill's morning tweet so we would know what we were doing this morning. So I'll just throw that in there. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is true. I'll agree with it so far. I don't have independent confirmation on this yet, says Bill. My reporters are still in the field. They're squirrels, too, I would add to that. But people are saying that if you use the hashtag KITM, and I encourage you to do so, KagroX will come and wash your car. Oh, damn it. Well, there goes the whole day. So, okay, now I got to get up to Maine and get a sponge. Greg, maybe you can help me out. Good morning. How are you?
I'm already in New England, so I could take that one for you.
Okay, excellent.
But, Bill's reporters are easily distracted, so, maybe just bring some peanuts and you don't even have to worry about the car.
All right, excellent. Well, we can
because they're not going to tell
you.
Who knows
what they're going to do to
They're
the
too
car
busy
after I
eating
wash it
peanuts.
anyway.
The Kyle Rittenhouse trial is not the important legal news, of course.
No. All right.
However, it gets all the eyeballs and it gets all the clicks, and that's what happens. Style
It'll
over
also make you
substance.
mad. Sure.
Yeah. Kyle Rittenhouse, according to the New York Times tweet, who has idolized law enforcement since he was young, arrived in Kenosha on August 25th, 2020 with at least one mission: play the role of police officer and medic.
Yes.
The night would end with him fatally shooting two men and wounding another. Now, you could look at that tweet and say, well, look, guy obviously has delusions of grandeur.
He may.
Or you could look at it and say, well, there's the New York Times again, sort of downplaying the guy who came with a rifle and shot people.
Yes, right. I mean, that's my thought was that's why he idolizes police. They can shoot people and walk away.
I suppose that's true. It depends what you think about the police. And, that leads to another topic, but we'll do that probably after the break. Or maybe before, we'll see. But in the meantime, I said this is the flashy, eyeball-drawing legal case, but not the important one.
Okay. There's probably another.
Well, there is.
There is another.
District Court rejects Trump's executive privilege claim for January 6 records.
It's a good one.
This is conservative jurist, Case Western legal eagle, Jonathan Adler.
Oh.
District Court rejects Trump's executive privilege claim for January 6 records, writing the Volokh conspiracy. In a well-reasoned opinion, the District Court rejects the former president's efforts to prevent the release of information by the National Archives. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of conservative lawyers who think that Trump's nuts here.
All right.
And, Adler's one of them.
Cool.
Judge Chutkan's reasoning, which he does in detail, is not too different from that in this statement on Trump's privilege claims released by members of Checks and Balances earlier this month. I signed this statement, says Adler, as did my co-bloggers, along with several former executive branch officials. The court considered and rejected Trump's challenge to the constitutionality of the President Records Act and challenged to Congress's authority to seek the records under the Mazars decision. That was over his taxes. Haven't heard much about his taxes, by the way, even though Congress got them. Of note, it is much more difficult for Trump to argue that Congress lacks legitimate legislative purpose in obtaining information about executive branch actions than it was to argue that Congress had no such purpose in seeking Trump's personal private financial records. So as noted above, an appeal is sure to follow if it hasn't been filed already, and I think it has. Fortunately, this case is moving along quickly. And if you're trying to follow what the judge did here, the judge did like three things in succession. We talked about that on the show a little bit yesterday, but what happened is, this case goes before the judge, and Trump says, even before you rule on it, I'm already appealing.
I already expect to lose.
And the judge said, this is a very unappealing appeal, and you can't do that because we haven't decided yet. And now that we've decided, I reject your appeal. So that was a separate action.
Okay.
So now everybody's waiting to see what the Court of Appeals does. And I guess the question on the table is, do you skip that and go directly to the Supreme Court? And I only say that because it's already 9 o'clock Thursday. And they have till midnight to settle this because 12:01 is Friday, and that's a deadline which stuff gets turned over.
Oh, does it happen first thing Friday, not last thing?
I don't know, but they could. I mean, there's no rule that says that at 12:01 the archives could just give everything to Congress and say, it's already settled. issue
good
is
rule.
moot, as they like to say in the law.
Yes. All right. Well, I kind of hope for that. Yeah. You can skip it. It's not up to, I don't get to decide. They decide. But, yeah, maybe. The court also, the Supreme Court will frequently say, well, somebody else can decide it. And
the Court of Appeals could decide not to take the case.
Yeah, that's true. And, right, that's the way they could engineer a skip, too. They just say, well, we won't take the case. And the Supreme Court would say, we will. We'll grab it and snap it up off.
And the Supreme Court could say, we don't take the case.
That's true, too.
That probably won't happen because they're interventionists and they're nutcases, but,
They like beer, though. So
whatever happens in that one, and I think it's far more important in terms of the implications, it's probably going to be resolved relatively quickly.
Okay. Well,
so that to me is the legal case that matters. Maybe Armando could come on at some point and actually give a considered legal opinion, which he has. Right. But I didn't totally understand it on Twitter, so I'm not going to speak for him.
Okay, no problem. I could look it up and see if I understand it, but we'll do what you understand first.
Okay, well,
that's what this hour is about.
So I'm going to switch gears too and move away from legal stuff altogether.
Aha, I knew it.
And talk a little bit about the pandemic, which we haven't done in a while.
I told you would understand that. Okay, yes, pandemic.
Yeah. Well, since you invited me to do something I understand a little better. Cyrus Shapur,
I don't understand that at all.
Works for the White House, says Wednesday just in, today being Thursday, this is a yesterday tweet, 1.33 million doses of vaccine reported administered over yesterday's total. That is to say Wednesday over Tuesday.
Okay.
And that includes 403,000 new vaccines and 719 boosters or additional doses. So the I already got one and I'm getting another is twice the rate of I'm getting a new one.
Okay.
But still, 403,000 is good. What I found interesting is we estimate by the end of Wednesday, over 900,000 5 to 11-year-olds will have gotten the first dose.
Okay. It's almost a million.
So, by the weekend, probably a million kids gotten their dose. And that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, I would think so. And I guess it's very easy to understand dips or plateaus in administration rate during the week when the kids are in school. The weekends, I guess, is when they'll really jump. And that's when
except
people
for the places
report.
where they're actually giving them in school.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Well, I guess there's that, too.
There are school-based clinics, and so sometimes they're given there.
School,
but there's a whole network of how that gets done. Okay. So we'll have to track that. But one way or another, a million doses are going in, and that's great.
Good job.
Why is that important? Because the pandemic isn't over. And the place that we see it most clearly right now happens to be Germany.
Of course. What's the word for seeing it most clearly?
I don't know because I don't speak German.
But okay.
But if you do speak German, you know what that word is. And
right.
So,
Fahrvergnügen,
and the nice thing about German is that if there isn't a word, there will be. Because you just take speak and you take clearly and you mash them together.
Wait and see.
Wait and see. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to wait and see what somebody tells us. So the Worldometers notes the daily new cases in Germany are setting new records.
All right.
I mean, it isn't just that the pandemic hasn't gone away. They're experiencing a major wave right now.
Germany too. Well, I have noticed that the Western European countries have sort of crept back into the stats nightly.
Well, we knew that with the UK, but Germany in particular, and experts say, according to the New York Times, that the recent surge in infections has resulted from the relatively low vaccination rate in some regions of Germany, like Bavaria, for example, second most populous region.
Really?
Conservative area.
Not into it, huh?
And the slow rollout of booster shots. And Abrar Karen reporting on this says that sounds very much like the United States, which is the comment that caught my eye. So then I looked at daily new cases in the U.S. and found that we've plateaued, and if anything, we're starting to rise a little bit. And Ellie Murray, who is an epidemiologist and goes by the name Epi Ellie on Twitter, so you don't mistake that fact, says the process of the outbreak moving between regions within the United States has been one of the most reliable and ignored parts of the pandemic. Cases start going down in one area. Everybody starts to act like it's over. No, it's coming for your region next.
I noticed that.
So it moved. You did. So it moved from the south to the north. We've seen that before. As cases start to go down to Alabama, they start to go up in Michigan.
Yes.
And so it's not totally over. It's quite interesting. In my area, the doctor's offices, for example, still insist on masks, even more so now than a month ago.
Really? Okay.
They're being a little proactive. Like, the difference is that a month ago, if you wanted to get an eye exam, for example, you go to the eye doctor, you walk in the door, everybody's wearing a mask. They, seat you separate from everybody else, at least by some distance. They pretend that they've increased the ventilation inside, which they really haven't. And you get your exam and you go home.
Easy. Yeah.
And now, just compared to a month ago, we're back to when you get there, you call ahead and say, I'm in the parking lot. And then you go in when they tell you, so that they're trying to limit the number of people that are inside at any given time. Just one step more proactive stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably because the weather's getting colder and the cases are starting to rise just a little bit. And they're trying to get ahead of it, and it's all a good thing. And it's just weird because when that happens, my friends down south are writing, oh, why are you doing that? You guys, look, it's going down. You guys are just so afraid of everything. You really have to open up. That's why Virginia lost, yada, yada. And look, it's different in Tennessee than it is in Vermont. It's different in Alabama right now than it is in Connecticut. And the Connecticut approach has always been a little bit more strict. And the fact that cases are not going down and we do have a plateau is something to keep an eye on. So the commentary is always, very interesting, especially from the non-medical people. I'm a Twitter expert because I follow this stuff. I've done the research, and I don't understand why you're doing this differently in that region than we're doing it here, because the way we do it is right.
Well,
and look at our numbers. We're going down. Now,
I do look.
You could apply that to politics.
Yeah.
Right. I'm looking at something. I see it. I'm accurately characterizing what's going on. Why it's happening is beyond my understanding, but I'm going to pretend I understand it and tell you what to do. And if I really apply this professionally, I could be a political consultant and tell you what's going on in Virginia and what you should do to win the next election.
Well, you can be a substacker anyway.
Yeah, something like that. But, that whole process of, watching what's happening with the pandemic, you still have to watch. You still have to be careful. You have to adjust what's going on regionally, and it's not over, and it doesn't matter what Scott Gottlieb says.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm for that. I've been watching it and mapping it and watch the red zone move from south to north. It's true, but I wanted to look back, and I think this was illustrated with the maps. I've been doing them for a while. Happened the same way last year. I mean, it
exactly
almost
right.
appears to be moving in a predictable pattern.
This is what happens.
Yeah. And people in Minnesota are very upset.
I thought we got rid of flu last year because we didn't have any over the summer.
Isn't that weird? And it keeps coming back.
And it keeps coming back. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. Well, I have noticed that. And and again, the presence of Western European countries on the daily, top 10 lists is happening again. It's been concentrated in Eastern Europe. They're still by far worse off. But I'm starting to notice, Germany, Switzerland, France showing up in the stats again, making it into the top 10. They've been out for, 3 months.
Right, and there's several different things going on. They made a decision not to vaccinate kids, for example, in the UK, and then you have the unvaccinated with some travel, and things do move regionally. So all of that is a factor. New York Times story, Germany debates imposing tighter rules as infections serve, exactly what people here don't want to hear. Nearly 40,000 new cases were registered in the country on Tuesday, the third time a daily record's been sent within a week. 230 people died, 236 people died of the disease in that 24-hour period. And Christian Drosten, head of virology at Berlin's Charity Hospital, Germany's most renowned research hospital, basically Christian Drosten is the Tony Fauci of Germany. We have a real emergency situation. Since the pandemic began, Germany's reported almost 97,000 deaths, and Dr. Drosten warned that a further 100,000 could result. They could double if no additional solutions were found, although the number of patients in intensive care beds is now less than half of what it was during the peak in January. So things are better because people are vaccinated compared to when it was at its worst, but this could easily spread and get out of control. The authorities in Bavaria, where cases have been rising 68% over the last 2 weeks, declared a state of emergency, Marcus Söder, who was one of the people who was thinking about being chancellor. The Bavarian governor last declared an emergency in December 2020. Several more states, including those that have been hardest hit, either have in place or plan to enact their own stricter regulations, mandating vaccinations or documentation. And so that's what's going on in Germany.
All right.
And why would Germany be experiencing this, but the U.S. is immune? Not likely, because our vaccination rates aren't nearly what they need to be in order to prevent those sorts of things from happening. So that's just a note.
Okay.
Okay. So there's other things, however, that are a little bit more positive. For example, this month we have 2 separate new COVID antiviral pills, you may remember.
Yes.
I don't know if they're out in market yet. I don't think they are. I think they are starting to show up in England. I think they were the UK's first one that approved them.
Okay.
But scientists still have questions.
Sure.
And here's 5 that Nature magazine points out. Number 1, how effective are the new antivirals in the real world? Number 2, how safe are they with post-approval marketing? Right? I mean, a lot of the stuff that comes out, you have to wait for it to be out there in huge numbers to really start seeing this stuff. Number 3, are the drugs going to work against variants of concern as they develop?
Okay.
And could the coronavirus become resistant to antivirals? When we had antivirals for flu, some of the early antivirals, the flu circulating in the world started to become resistant. Okay. To not all of them, but to some of them. So, that's happened before, and that's something you have to watch out for. Drug resistance is a familiar problem, and it's the reason that some viral infections, such as HIV and hepatitis C, are treated using combos of antivirals. So, do you take them both? Because that's better?
Sure.
Or do they have the same mechanism? Do they have different mechanisms? We're going to need combo therapies in the future, but these have only been tested as single therapies, so we don't know.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't know. Eat them all. That's what Joe Rogan would do.
November 5th analysis by the science information and analytics firm Airfinity in London found only 16 combination trials of COVID therapies that aim to enroll more than 100 participants. None of them involved these drugs that work. Most of them were looking at hydrochloroquine.
Oh.
but that's one of the problems when you have these bizarre and absurd treatments out there. It doesn't just not work and then you have to argue with people who says it does. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. It makes you spend way too much time. I mean, how many more
somebody says, let me at least
cause autism studies do you have to do? And then you spend the money on that. You don't spend money on maybe we should be looking at cancer and COVID treatments.
Yeah, I guess that will distract you. Somebody who finally says, fine, I'll prove it. And they have to spend their time proving it.
Well, these things take time. So if you decide to do it now, you don't publish till next year, and that's a whole year that you've lost. And, it's the middle of a pandemic, and that's not a good idea. And then finally, who'll be able to access the new drugs? And again, here's an interesting nuance. Yes. All right, these drugs are way better and less expensive and a lot easier to administer because they're pills than the IV medications.
Monoclonal therapies?
Yeah, monoclonal antibodies that they're pushing in Florida, for example.
Yes,
However,
okay.
Even though Merck has signed an agreement with the medicine's patent pool to provide the intellectual property licenses needed, and even though generic medicine companies are starting to ramp up production of this drug from Merck, and they're talking about the same thing with Pfizer, that's not necessarily the administrative barrier here. Remember how they work. If you get tested and you're positive, you need to take the medication within a couple of days for it to work.
Yes.
That's what happens with flu and some of the anti-flu medicines we have over the counter.
I remember that.
Like Tamiflu,
right? Yeah, 3 days. Whatever, right.
All right. Logically, therefore, you need to know you have the flu before you take the medicine.
All right.
That means you have to test.
Ow.
And so if you don't have the capacity to test, home testing or some other cheap, easy way to test to see whether or not you have COVID,
Yes.
Then the fact that you have a pill that will work within 2 or 3 days of having COVID or 5 days of having COVID, whatever it is, that doesn't do you any good if you don't know you have it. And the only way you're going to know you have it is to test. And if you don't have the testing, the whole process falls apart. So if you're looking at a developing country, you can give them the drug for free. But if you don't provide a testing mechanism, then it doesn't do you much good.
Yeah.
That's also true here, but it's even more true overseas.
All right. Well,
I'm just pointing that out. So that's why one of the reasons these, we have these medications. Now, the monoclonals, at least you have to be pretty sick. So chances are you're going to know you're sick and you're going to have testing. But for the ones that are supposed to be given early in the course before you get sick, you have to know you have the illness. Yeah.
Or be extraordinarily, well, not necessarily extraordinary, but you have to be wealthy enough to be able to force someone to give you the monoclonal antibodies anyway, like Joe Rogan and famous athletes who say they'll treat their COVID with a cocktail of treatments, including one that's effective, and then point at all the other ones as the cure.
Right, exactly.
That's how he handled it.
So, as I think it was Philip Bum pointed out there, the really important thing to do when you get COVID is to, call your podcast host and get some advice on how to take your medicine. Right. So let's call Joe Rogan and see what he says. That's what Aaron Rodgers did.
Yeah, right. I know the advice of Howard Stern commenting on that and saying, next time Aaron Rodgers goes down on the field and is injured, let Joe Rogan treat him.
Right. And right before the break, which is coming up,
yes, it is.
Politico did have this piece, study Fox viewers more likely to believe COVID falsehoods. Duh. The study doesn't prove that they got the falsehoods from Fox, only that people who believe falsehoods watch Fox. So cause and effect is tough because if you're already in that mindset, maybe Fox is the channel you choose.
Sure. Maybe you were just wandering around with the wrong
maybe
idea
you got your lousy recommendations from Facebook.
Sure. I got it off of a Dixie cup, and I just happened to find a channel that agrees with me.
Yeah, I got some local Virginia stuff on COVID after the break, though.
Okay, perfect. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with me. We were talking pandemic. I believe you said you had some Virginia news. What have we done?
I don't know if you're familiar with a health chain called Centara.
Yeah.
Not mine. Very active, for example, in the Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach area.
Okay.
They have a couple of hospitals. And there's an ICU guy named Paul Marik, M-A-R-I-K, that works for a group. Let's charitably just name them group, called FLCCC, Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance. Okay. And they push ivermectin and other protocols in order to treat people. There's another fellow who's from Wisconsin, another ICU guy named Pierre Corey, and between the two of them, they've done a lot of the ivermectin pushing and protocol, making it, fancy because they're doctors and so on and so forth.
Apple flavored.
Right? So one of the things that they push is something called the MATH protocol.
Like Karl Rove.
Yeah, and that stands for methylprednisone, which is a steroid, ascorbic acid,
which is what?
thiamine, and heparin.
Let's see. Okay.
plus ivermectin and other things.
Maybe
Now,
so.
one of the things that you have to remember about COVID is that when it causes illness, it causes inflammation. So any anti-inflammatory, like a steroid, like the M in math, or the supposed use of hydrochloroquine or ivermectin, the concept behind all of this is that as anti-inflammatories, they should help.
All right.
If you can prove it, that's one thing, but that's the logic behind it, the theory of the case, as it were.
Okay.
So they were pushing this thing called the math protocol as part of their, everybody's trying to shut us down, but ivermectin and other things work, and here are our protocols to prove it. So I give you today Retraction Watch, Bad Math, COVID Treatment paper by Pierre Corey, retracted for flawed results. A Wisconsin physician has been pushing unproven treatments for COVID, has lost a paper on a hospital protocol. His group says radically reduced deaths after one of the facilities cited in the study said the data were incorrect. Pierre Corey, whose titles have included Medical Director of the Trauma and Life Support Center, Critical Care Service, and Chief Associate Professor at University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, Public Health in Madison, has become a key figure in the controversy over the use of ivermectin. In December 2020, Corey, who rails on Twitter about unfair and incompetent journals, and another ivermectin advocate, Paul Marek of Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, and several other authors published a paper in the Journal of Intensive Care Medicine on a group they created called the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance, or FCCC. Per the article, the panel collaboratively reviewed the emerging clinical, radiographic, and pathological reports of frontline experts based on the shared early impressions, the increasing medical journal publications, and rapidly accumulating personal clinical experience. A treatment protocol was created for the hospitalized patient on the core therapy of methylprednisolone, ascorbic acid, thiamine, heparin, and co-interventions, otherwise known as MATH+. Corey's group reported the patients treated were roughly 75% less likely to die. These conclusions met with skepticism, as Medscape reported, and according to the retraction notice, the article's been retracted after the journal received notice from Centara Norfolk General Hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, raising concerns about the accuracy of the hospital mortality data. Centara's notice included the following statement: the data from Centara Norfolk General Hospital were presented in Table 2, which lists in-hospital 28-day mortality rates. The mortality rate was reported as 6.1 as compared to mortality in the literature from 15.6 to 32. But the data is inaccurate. We have conducted a careful review, and the mortality rate was 10, not 6. In addition, of those 191 patients, only 73 received the therapy they claimed. So basically, they made up the numbers.
Well, that's it. That's easier.
So given the above concerns that are material to the article's findings, the article's been retracted. So the main article that pushed their main contribution was the so-called hospital protocol. The paper was retracted. Following that, the hospital said, you can't use this therapy. It's not based on anything. And so here comes the story. This was just the background.
Wow. Okay.
So the doctor is suing the hospital.
That's a switch.
Right? So you go, usually a hospital sues the doctor. In this case, the doctor is suing the hospital.
Sure.
All right. So if you go to their main website, patients at Centara Norfolk General Hospital are dying needlessly. Lawsuit filed as hospital handcuffs doctor's ability to save dying COVID-19 patients. Okay. And then they have a press release for immediate release, November 9th, 2021. And the press release starts with this: world's leading ICU doctor files lawsuit against hospital system after being barred from administering safe and effective COVID-19 treatments, which he didn't add in a protocol that was just withdrawn because all their data was bogus.
All right. Wow.
Right. That's all happening in Virginia.
At least
and
some
Nick
of it.
Mark, who's like a real ICU doctor, is noting this on Twitter. He says the FLC, it's Florida, it's not Florida, it's Frontline, FLCCC press release is really something. world's leading critical care doctor. I think this press release was written by Paul Malik's ego.
It certainly appears.
Also notable is paper about the math protocol is retracted today after review of data showed it actually increased mortality.
Oh, man, he's going to have a lot of lawsuits on his hands, I imagine.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot going on here. But, in terms of legal stuff, actually, I find this a lot more fascinating than the Rittenhouse trial. Well,
that'll be in your wheelhouse. Well, there's always a teaching position for him at the University of Austin, which, the new sort of online creation thing, which, as best I can figure out, is like a Substack university of some kind.
Well, there's PragerU.
Yeah, there's always that one. I mean, this seems to be following in the same footsteps. Interesting. There's going to be, I guess, well, who knows? A lot of the people who go in for this sort of thing, they're very weird. But you could certainly envision having a lot of people saying, "Why? Wait, my."
I'm just waiting for Andrew Wakefield to be the expert witness.
I guess
who's
so.
He's
not busy, is he?
He's going to talk about the fact that people are always harassed online, and therefore,
right.
I'm an expert in what happens when they try to handcuff and silence you.
Right.
Based on bogus data that you had to retract.
The medical dark web.
Something along those lines.
Great.
So,
okay.
It's a lot of pandemic news is what I'm trying to say. And, instead we look at the politics and we look at the legal stuff. Well, here's a intersection between medicine and the legal profession, which from a medical perspective usually is not good if you're the medical side.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
doctors don't like lawyers, but when they need lawyers, it's not so good.
Yeah. Well, I remember Eastern Virginia Medical College. It was name that rings a bell. I think that was Ralph
EVMS.
Northam's.
That's where your governor went.
Right.
And that's why you remember it.
Right. That's it. And okay, well.
See, I'm good at this stuff. David tells me stuff, and then I remind him about it later.
That's it. That's how we work.
That's how we work.
Okay.
That's how it rolls.
Cool. Well, they got some cleanup to do. Clean up on aisle. Whatever.
Clean up on aisle 4. Yep, absolutely.
I see you.
All right. Now, speaking of Virginia.
Yes.
Let's stay on Virginia here.
All right.
And here's Kyle Kondik writing.
Hi.
How likely is a Democratic comeback next year?
Oh.
And the answer is, it's not so great. I mean, because usually what happens is when a party's in the White House, the opposite party generally wins the election.
Yes. Okay.
Right. And he writes things like factors like gas prices and the trajectory of COVID may be largely beyond the Democrats' influence, but it's entirely possible that the country's mood will brighten by November 22, rather.
Yes, all right.
And that could bolster Mr. Biden's approval rating. And they've sometimes had an unusually good development emerge in their favor. But if there's any lesson from last week's results, it's that the circumstances were ordinary, not extraordinary.
I see.
Because generally the out party wins and the in party loses.
So
and that's been true 11 out of 12 times in Virginia in the last 12 gubernatorial elections.
Right. But also it's definitely CRT.
Well, that's the thing. So David Carroll, who's a political scientist, says policy advocates and strategists, and he's got strategists in scare quotes, as I think is proper, of all stripes have an incentive to downplay the pattern. If Democrats lose midterms because that's what parties in the White House do, then maybe advocates and strategists' hobby horses aren't that important.
Right. Also, it's very depressing.
Attention to this historical pattern, attention to the pattern suggests that a party can do a good job reissue positioning and campaign tactics but still lose. Beyond professional advocates is an emotional tendency to believe that losers must have been incompetent or misguided, but not always. So this should cheer you up. There's nothing wrong with Democratic policy. They lost anyway.
I guess, except it's like no matter what you do, you'll probably lose. Oh.
But interpretations may swing to fatalism, he says. LOL, nothing matters, so parties in power should just seize the moment to please the base. There's something this is view, but it can be overstated. Parties' stands and behavior matter, but so do factors beyond the control. So to the extent the party can use its power to create a good election year, that may help. Avoiding scandal and unpopular extreme positions is also advisable.
Oh, thank you. Yes, good idea.
But sometimes whatever the party in power does won't be enough.
Yeah.
Now, if you take that, again, look at Virginia and then go bigger, there's a fantastic piece by a really good analyst. I like Perry Bacon Jr. In the Washington Post, and I'm so glad he became a contributor there. And it's called, Have Democrats Reached the Limits of White Appeasement Politics?
I don't know. Have we?
Well, that's the thing. Maybe. See, what happens here is that the Republicans have a clear white grievance, and the Democrats' response to that, in order to win, is very often something along the lines of white appeasement. Think of the Skip Gates Beer Summit, for example. Of course, the one that everybody's going to think of is Sister Soldier. And, you might even do the Obama Jeremiah Wright speech.
Okay.
So what happens is that Democrats make the play that, look, we're not going to go out of our way to antagonize the white vote because you need the white vote to win. And Perry Bacon's piece here is basically saying that's fine so long as you don't put in place politics or policy that's actually going to hurt black voters. Because when you do that, they won't vote for you and you're going to lose even more. And that's where you get to the limits of the backlash. He says, for example, in last week's Virginia gubernatorial election, Republican Glenn Youngkin defeated Democrat Terry McAuliffe in a somewhat surprising setback for Democrats, considering that Biden won the state by 10 points. But as Dave Carroll and Kyle Kondik point out, but you also have to consider that the House, the party in power in the White House usually loses Virginia.
Yeah, okay.
Youngkin ran in part, and by the way, the margin is getting smaller. It's like 1.9% now.
Yes,
so it was a pretty close race.
Victory. Yeah. Right.
Youngkin ran in part on white grievance, attacking critical race theory in particular, along with the broader idea that America is too fixated on racial division. McAuliffe accurately criticized Youngkin for using racist dog whistles in running on CRT. And Youngkin blew out McAuliffe among white voters, which has stirred conversation about whether the Republican won because he appealed to white racial anxieties. McAuliffe did not. But what lessons to take away from Virginia is important because of where American politics is headed in the next few years. The 2022 elections are likely to be difficult for Democrats, both because the president's party usually struggles in midterms, because of Biden's declining approval. Republicans will campaign in 22 by casting Democrats as too beholden to people of color, because that's what they always do.
Yes.
And then 2023 will start the Republican presidential nomination, during which GOP hopefuls will employ a white grievance strategy, assuming the party doesn't simply give the nomination to Trump. Who is of course, the embodiment of white grievance politics.
Yes.
So to do well in 2022 and 2024, the Democrats need to win white voters, including some who have less than progressive views on racial issues. And the temptation will be strong to go over the top, perhaps even unconsciously, essentially running a 2020 version of Bill Clinton. And Biden, his inner circle, and other top officials are white older people who embraced that strategy in previous eras. He, Perry Bacon, would be dismayed to see Democratic congressional candidates do that, publicly attack the squad or Black Lives Matter, and the Virginia race is instructive here. Democrats nominated McAuliffe over several other candidates, including 2 black women. During his general election campaign, McAuliffe reversed his previous support for a key plank of police reform, getting rid of qualified immunity. And Virginia Democrats took steps right out of the white appeasement playbook and ran a white male candidate. They moved right on racial issues. They lost. Now, I had been saying vaguely I didn't think McAuliffe was all that great a candidate, but Perry Bacon lays out exactly why he wasn't that great a candidate.
Right.
You can't run a Clinton campaign and ignore your own base and think you're going to win in 2022. It doesn't work that way. So,
even though there was pretty good turnout.
He made this huge gaffe and said something about parents not really having responsibility for what happens in school, at least the way it was played. But, also minority voting was relatively down compared to white voting, and his getting rid of legal qualified immunity and other things that were seen by the minority community as not having their back may have had a lot to do with that. And that doesn't get played up very much.
No. Yeah, I'm not even 100% certain of the stats and the turnout among minority voters. I don't know that it was that far down.
It was up, but it wasn't as up as much as the white vote. So, you have to be careful about how you characterize it. It's not that it was depressed. It just didn't rise as much as the other parties did.
Yeah, although, I don't know how much room there was for improvement, but I guess...
Well, there was room for
check
improvement
on
the other side, so there was room for improvement on this side, because only 35% of people voted.
All right, well, then there is room. Okay. Yeah, well, without
I don't know if that
getting
35 is accurate. I may be confusing it with some other place like where I live.
Okay.
But, it certainly wasn't anything like a presidential level.
I would assume that there were certainly people who could have been motivated to come out and didn't. And that was a call out early on in the primary that McAuliffe.
Right, and remember, Democrats rely on non-white, Latino, black, people of color, infrequent voters, which is very important, whereas Republicans tend to rely on older, white, frequent voters.
Yeah.
So if you want to get your folks out, you have to give them a reason to.
Yeah.
And McAuliffe did not give them a reason to.
I guess that's fair, right? I mean, and Youngkin they definitely hit the jackpot in infrequent white voters, which is a different group that they, I guess, are coming to rely on since 2016 on. Anyway, that's been a winning formula for them.
So the way that Bacon puts McAuliffe actions here, there are also conservative whites and Latinos who aren't frequent voters but could be motivated to turn out by an effective GOP grievance campaign, something that may have happened last year when Trump won millions more voters than he did in 2016. So while it's impossible to say precisely how much appeasement is needed, a Democratic candidate for president or statewide office in a swing state probably can't advocate reparations or drastically cutting police funding and expect to win.
Okay, I think...
Right? When Vice President Harris, was asked this year if America is a racist country, the only answer she could give and remain a viable future candidate was the one she gave. Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah.
In this era, the pressures for white appeasement likely do not end up with Democrats taking racist actions like they have in the past, but rather limit how anti-racist they can be, and that's a real problem. White appeasement leads to policies that hurt people of color. It incentivizes public humiliation of prominent people of color, and that's where you start picking on the historians who are pushing CRT. Why are you singling them out? What is the purpose and point of that? If you're a Democrat, if you're a liberal, if you're a centrist.
To show you're not one of those.
Yeah, exactly. Don't. That's stupid. Leave it alone.
Okay.
It results in civil rights causes and candidates of color being sidelined. It's of limited and diminishing electoral value. The party needs to stop and think hard every single time before it turns to this deeply troubling, increasingly outmoded reflex. Democratic white appeasement should be narrow, careful, and rare.
I've heard that formulation. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But all of us do it. I mean, the moment I heard defund the police, I told you it was a stupid slogan. Not the concept. The slogan was going to hurt us. It's true. I don't think that saying defund the police is white appeasement backlash. On the other hand, what you can't do is take that and then move on and say, and therefore we're going to be against police reform.
Yes, okay.
That's where it starts hurting people.
All right. Yeah, okay. I can believe that. We
are for police reform. It's just not defund the police, but we have to do something, and we can run on it. It's really important to do that. And then Perry Bacon, I think in this piece, I've read a bunch of pieces this morning, so they're all beginning to blend together. But the Democratic Party running folks like Reverend Warnock, shows that they're not automatically going to turn to an old white guy every time something goes wrong.
Although things hadn't gone wrong then, but this is a good reason not to do that.
There are people in the party who, in fact, can very effectively address racial issues. Warnock is one of them.
Yeah.
And so folks like that are who the Democrats have to rely on to deal with this backlash to white grievance. And the backlash to white grievance is something the Democrats have to capitalize on, because white grievance is certainly what the Republicans are capitalizing on. And that point, I think, is very well made by Perry Bacon.
I think so. And there's a lesson in it, too. I mean, actually, among the people most inclined as candidates, let's say, to participate in that activity and to join in the swing back and the improper backlash, and begin, flailing wildly, either attacking, particular members of Congress and saying, well, I'm not one of those crazies, would do well to remember that every time someone else is running a campaign saying, I'm not, and except the I'm not is Donald Trump, they're reminded, remember, you can't win an election based on what you're not and what you're against, even though Republicans seem to be doing just fine with it. You have to say what you're for, and that's where this comes. You got to have a positive formulation. How will you address racial issues in a way that's progressive and helpful, but doesn't necessarily suffer from the same shortcomings that the backlash people like to point at?
Right, and then another way of looking at it, and I think Perry Bacon made this point explicitly, and others certainly have, is that a lot of the stuff that people are arguing about, in fact, have racial overtones, like CRT and the schools, for example.
Sure.
So that when you say, look, McAuliffe was a bad candidate because he didn't really have a proper counter to what Youngkin was doing in schools, is a very anodyne way of saying, look, this was a race issue, and McAuliffe didn't really have a good answer to it.
Okay. Yeah. I guess so.
Right? But you don't have to make it explicitly a racial issue for McAuliffe to have a good answer to it.
Probably better if you don't.
It's probably exactly right. And that makes Perry Bacon's point about how you run against white grievance without making it worse. Right?
Okay.
And basically you have to say, we're going to defend the schools rather than we don't teach CRT and we don't like those CRT people. You should vote for us.
Yeah. Okay. I'm for that.
And there's a lot of reasons to defend the schools. And people, for the most part, interestingly, this was the Axios piece the other day we talked about, people like their schools, just like people like their congressmen.
Yes, right, okay.
So you have a lot of leeway to run that way. And what McAuliffe didn't do is he didn't specifically counter what Youngkin was doing with the schools because he was governor and he could have run on, I have a good record in schools and I'm for schools, rather than, well, I'm going to change my mind on this and not do this or not do that or change the topic or, he's Trump and that's going to be my focus. He didn't have a clear, he wasn't running as the education candidate. Let's put it that way. He started out that when he opened up his race, that was the thing he honed on. And then he didn't do anything about it for months and months.
Yeah. Well, that's not a great idea. And then, of course, he said the wrong thing the wrong way, and that didn't help, and there was, I guess, no recovering from it. But that's true. He could have certainly run on, hey, come on, our schools are good, and I worked hard to make them good, and they're good, and you have a disagreement about one policy or another. But essentially, you all, with your CRT screaming, are running a defund the schools campaign. And teachers are good people, and we need to support them. And they're doing a good job. And
that's the way you go, and that's the way you should go in 2022 when you are a candidate running against this nonsense. That's exactly right.
Excellent. I'll take it. I mean, really, why not, right? For all the complaints about, well, you don't want to say, and you don't want to run on the defund the police because people know that the police, you got to be reformed, but they're necessary. Well, okay, fine. Teachers, maybe they need maybe there are reforms that could do well with, not the teachers per se, but curricula and other particulars. But the real Republican playbook on this. I know Youngkin made a big deal out of it, and he capitalized on this gaffe, and he was able to get people to say, well, what we don't like is Terry McAuliffe saying these things. That means we don't have to do now is remember, oh yeah, I remember how Republicans reformed the schools. They slashed their budgets and say everybody should go to private school or get vouchers.
And now they want to burn books.
Yeah. Oh yes, we didn't even get to that. And that happened in Virginia too. I'm sure you're thinking of the same thing. That was the Stafford County School Board in a meeting, and an astonishing moment in deciding that they would ban whatever their particular list of nasty books is this time. But just blurting out the quiet part, of course, two members,
I want to identify the books, and then I want to burn them.
Yeah. Well, not only do we want to get rid of them, we ought to actually light a fire and throw them in there. I thought that was some astonishing confluence there between
But that's, a reminder of why the out party often wins.
Mm-hmm. Right, if they now become the in party because Youngkin is on his way in, and they overstep and get way too excited about having won, and then think, the time is right for me to finally talk about burning books, and they blurt it out, and then there has to be backlash, and the rest of the Republicans in a normal time would rein them back in. But of course, we're not in normal times, and they will try actually running on this and fundraising. I will burn 2 books, and that's where we'll go from here.
Just as it's always important, and people are learning too late, that, listen, you have to vote for your candidates for president based on who they'll appoint to the Supreme Court. You have to vote in local school board elections. School board elections matter. Things happen locally.
Yes.
And so you have to get involved, and yes, parents should be involved. And that's what Terry McAuliffe should have been pushing too.
True. And it's not hard, by the way. I know things sometimes are confusing. If you have a nonpartisan school board election, you say, I can't follow. Don't worry about it. They're not really nonpartisan. The parties will tell you which people they're for. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You can look it up. And very often the nonpartisan election, like nonpartisan board in Stafford County, true. But the 2 people talking about burning books are, local Republican club chairs. So, it takes about 2 seconds in Google to figure out who they are and where they're coming from. You can vote in local school board elections. You can do it, guys. I trust you. I believe it. This audience knows, and they vote in it. But tell other people. Tell your neighbors. Tell the squirrels.
So, anyway, that's my show for today.
Oh, okay. Good. I liked it. It was good. Will you do another one tomorrow?
No, but you will.
Oh, all right. Well, yes. Okay. So you'll have to tune in for 2 of my shows tomorrow. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate all of the update and all the lead-offs for it. Many things to talk
we love
about.
Virginia. We want to focus on Virginia.
You have to. I would make you if you didn't. Probably not. But it works out well, and it's illustrative of a lot of the things that are going on, and it's on everybody's mind. So
yeah, follow Perry Bacon, and of course follow that court case with the National Archives, because we're going to have some resolution before tomorrow, I would think. And vote to support the schools.
Okay.
And keep that in mind.
Will. Yeah, all right, and it even gives us some thoughts about how to do the campaigning next time, which is what everybody is casting about for. So thanks to Greg, thanks to Perry Bacon Jr. for writing it, and Greg
thanks
for
to David Carroll for reminding us that what political consultants and people on Twitter tell you, well, this means that I was always right about this. Just take that with a grain of salt.
Right, unless I tell you, because I was right. I don't know. I'll get you some salt. Don't worry about it. Thanks, Greg. I want to lower my salt intake, but sometimes it's necessary. Can't do 0. All right, we'll check in with you next on Monday. Wow, the weekend's coming. Didn't even think about it that way. We'll see you then, and be back in just a minute. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I am scrolling back furiously to try and find the story. I don't think I put aside the story of what was going on in Stafford County, but I might as well. And here we go. I've found it here. We saw yesterday it was Timothy Burke was, I think, most active in circulating this video. Let's see, I guess a communications consultant and author as well. Timothy Burke tweets as Bubba Prog, like Bubba Progressive, I guess. And was he? I don't know whether he was the original source of the video, but much of what people were passing around from there came from him and from Aaron Blake as well. Aaron Blake, of course, senior political reporter at Washington Post, also spotted this stuff. Aaron Blake, I guess, was first out with the written reports and relying on the local Fredericksburg newspaper to get the facts out. And then it was, our Timothy Burke who had the video. So, yeah, what are we talking about here? Let me go back down to Aaron Blake's tweet from yesterday. School board members in Virginia are literally recommending that we burn books. He takes a screen cap from Fredericksburg.com. That's the site of the Freelance Star. Not the Freelance Star, but the name of the paper is the Lance Star, and the modifier here is that it's free. They don't give it out for free, but it's like freedom type free. Covers Fredericksburg. Spotsylvania School Board orders libraries to remove, quote, sexually explicit books. And we'll read the article, I guess, as we get the full flavor of the thing. But you might have some idea going into it about, well, we might be talking about people who are more discriminating, perhaps, about what they will regard as, or are they less discriminating? Less discriminating about what they regard as sexually explicit, let's say. Anyway, it's a surprising combination, I think, of people involved in the issue here. Oh my gosh, I will tell you this, there's nothing free about this paper. There's more pop-ups in this. I better read it before another pop-up gets in the way. All right, well, let's just read it this way. The Spotsylvania County, did I say Stafford County? Yeah, I think I might have meant, I got that wrong. But anyway, Spotsylvania County School Board has directed staff to begin removing books that contain, quote, sexually explicit material from library shelves and report on the number of books that have been removed at a specially called meeting next week. The directive came after a parent, and you got to listen to parents, right? They have every right to dictate how school libraries will work, because if you don't think so, then you'll be caught saying parents should not have input, and there's no middle ground here, as opposed to saying, sure, I think parents should have input in what goes on in the schools, but I don't think that one parent who claims to have, say, done their own research on the internet should be able to call the shots for the schools or the school boards. I mean, maybe there should be multiple inputs here with lots of people who have some experience, some of whom even have educational backgrounds in education and how it should be run. We should probably let them have some say in what's going on as well, and then formulate our response based on all of that. But anyway, the directive came after a parent raised concerns at the school board's meeting Monday about books available through the Riverbend High School's digital library app. And as other people pointed out, like, imagine worrying about, oh my God, kids will read sexually explicit literature, sexually explicit passages in otherwise, world-renowned literature in many cases, over their smartphones, you see, using the digital library app, versus, say, just watching porn on those things too. Like, if they need sexually explicit material, there's no end to what's available. It won't really matter that there's literature with dirty words in it available over the digital library app. And by the way, it's available through Riverbend High School's digital library app. That might mean that it's not on the shelves in Riverbend High School at all and can't be removed and burned. But, whatever. They're going to call for the burning anyway because it's very splashy and it makes headlines. The board also requested a report next week on the process by which books are selected for inclusion in digital and hard copy library collections at the different school levels, and indicated that it will consider a division-wide library audit, which, by the way, if you think that has anything to do with these people reading those books, you can bet your life that ain't happening. What it will be, the division-wide library audit, will be just like the election audits, by the way. You'll have the rough equivalent of cyber ninjas conducting this audit. If you don't like a book and you are, let's say, a Republican, email me and I will put that book on the naughty list and then we'll burn it. That will be the audit. The criteria for pulling books from circulation this week is, quote, sexually explicit, but the board plans to refine how material is determined to be, quote, objectionable for a further review of library holdings. So first, we'll burn the sexually explicit books. Then, but I will not speak up because I am not a sexually explicit book. But then, when they come for the objectionable books, right, and no one will be left because everything's objectionable, right? I object to that has, Sesame Street characters in it and, the whole Big Bird thing. Isn't that enough? Let's burn it. The board voted 6-0, so you got a lot of work to do if you are in Spotsylvania County. To reverse this, the board voted 6-0 to order the removal, whatever removal it is. Berkeley District Representative Aaron Gramp, Grampp, was not in attendance for the vote on that issue. She might have been a seventh vote for it. Who knows? Now, this is the interesting part where we get to the people talking about the books wanting to be removed. You got two board members. You got Livingston area Representative Kirk Twigg, who is what you probably were guessing, an old white man, saying that he would like to see the removed books burned. He's joining, though, the first mover in this to say it, and this is of some interest. Cortland Representative Rabi, and it's not R-O-B-B-Y, it's Rabi, R-A-B-I-H, Abu Ismail, Rabi Abu Ismail. And he, as it turns out, is a youngster, a 24-year-old Lebanese American, as I understand it. I just found that kind of interesting. Lest you think, though, that a 24-year-old Lebanese American immigrant would perhaps be a Republican or a Democrat. No, well, not in Spotsylvania County anyway. He is the local Republican club chair, and you can find all that information you need to point to about that on the interwebs, because there's not a lot of Rabi Abu Ismails being reported on, if you search alongside Republican, for instance. But both Republicans, but he was the first mover in all of this, and in saying, I think we should throw those books in a fire, Abu Ismail said. And Twigg said he wants to, quote, see the books before we burn them. So that's good. So we can identify within our community that we are eradicating this bad stuff. So that does seem like a sensible policy, right? I want to see the books to make sure that we're burning the bad ones. I gotta give him credit for that. Abu Ismail just says, I just want to see books burning, I guess, and it doesn't really matter whether they're good ones or bad ones. And wow, what can I tell you? That's an odd confluence there. Although it's odd, really, that you would find the 24-year-old Lebanese American aligning himself with the Republican Party. But, if you want to get elected in Spotsylvania County, I guess that's probably a pretty good place to start. Anyway, Monday evening's discussion was spurred by parents of a Riverbend student who brought their concerns to the meeting. The mother said during public comments that she was initially alarmed by, quote, LGBTQIA fiction. I guess that they have a designation for that. And said that, she said it was immediately made available upon accessing the library app, which I guess she hopes you'll take as, well, you log in with the app and it says, do you want to read about gay stuff? As opposed to, well, what's available? Science fiction, popular literature, top bestsellers, and I'm sure there probably was a button, LGBTQIA, and you click on it and it says, well, there's LGBTQIA fiction available. Do you want to read it? Yes, you press the button. Now, if you don't want to read it, don't press the button. But, this is a parent complaint. The point is there was a button, and that's the big issue here. All right. It was made available immediately upon accessing the library app. Yeah, that's how the app works. After doing more research, she discovered a book in the collection that she found more upsetting. Let me press this button to see if something really offends me. No, this one doesn't. This one offends me. I found it. I've done research. The book, entitled 33 Snowfish by Adam Rapp, R-A-P-P. Don't know anything about it. We'll see what the Freelance Star has to say about it. It concerns 3 homeless teenagers attempting to escape from pasts that include sexual abuse, prostitution, and drug addiction. And you can't have people trying to escape that. That is just offensive. Publishers Weekly described 33 Snowfish, which the American Library Association named a best book for young adults in 2004, those communist bastards. They describe it as a, quote, dark tale about 3 runaways who understand hatred and violence better than love, and noted readers may have trouble stomaching the language and the subject matter. My guess is that Mom didn't read it so much as she read the Publisher's Weekly description and said, readers may have trouble stomaching the language. I have a weak stomach. It's time for me to become an activist. The review recommends the book for ages 15 and up. Darnella Sims, Director of Teaching and Learning for the school division, said Riverbend High School Principal Troy Wright and school librarians have been looking into the parents' concerns since they were raised with the school last week. It's been a burning issue for a week. She asked the board for time for staff to review existing processes for vetting library books. It is incumbent on us to make sure that whatever the policy says we need to do, we're doing, and if something needs to be strengthened, it's on us to do it, Sims said. But Abu Ismail said that whatever the process is that's in place, it hasn't worked, and demanded an immediate audit of all school division library holdings, like he's going to do that. He said he doesn't like the idea of Rapp's book being on school division library shelves for one more night, and that the fact that it is in a school library means public schools, quote, would rather have our kids reading gay pornography than about Christ, which is interesting. So maybe he's a Christian Lebanese American named Abu Ismail. But, you know, they speak Arabic. So whatever, that's pretty interesting. I don't know if it's gay pornography. And, of course, the book might not be on a shelf at all for one night or zero. It wouldn't make a difference. It's a digital library holding. And probably the reason that it made it into the digital library collection is by virtue of it having been an award-winning piece of literature. And not, but the only thing that could have stopped it, of course, is if Rabbi Abu Ismail had sat down and read it, he could say, no, this is inappropriate for kids. Let's keep it out of, but he didn't read it and he won't read it. Abu Ismail accused Division Superintendent Scott Baker of not being proactive by looking into school library holdings before parents raised concerns. Why didn't you read every book in the school system, in the digital holdings, by the way, of the school system, so that you could prevent this from happening? And the answer is, I was superintending the effing schools. We were actually looking into, do we have enough classes? Are there chairs for everybody? Do the pencil sharpeners work? But I should have been reading every book. You're right. Dr. Baker, you saw this coming from Northern Virginia like a week ago, right? Did it not occur to you to check what is in our libraries? It's not in our library. It's in someone else's library, and it's digitally available along with actual gay pornography over people's smartphones. I'm sorry. And if they didn't get it through the Riverbend High School app, they could have gotten it from somewhere else, like the public library. But anyway, Baker, of course, falling on his sword. He said he will take responsibility for any failure of the process for selecting library books. I would not have thought to do an audit because I have great faith and trust in our librarians, he said. If we find something being missed in a process, then we do refine the process. There was no ill intent here. We don't have all the information. Battlefield Representative Baron Braswell noted that what one person finds offensive, another person might not. And he also asked for time for division staff to examine its internal processes. Suddenly reasonable here, right? We have to be clear on what is offensive and should not be in our schools and what should be, he said. You can't do an audit of books without developing screening criteria, and you have to have facts in order to do that. Braswell proposed in a motion that the board receive a report from the superintendent about the circumstances surrounding the inclusion of 33 snowfish in the Riverbend Library, if it's there, next week, and at that time consider the criteria that would be involved in conducting an audit of our books. In the end, the board only voted on a substitute to Braswell's motion put forward by Lee Hill Representative Lisa Phelps to begin the removal of, quote, sexually explicit books this week and receive a report next week on how many have been removed. What a strong motion that is. Twigg said he would like to broaden the criteria for identifying objectionable books. There are some bad, evil-related materials that we have to be careful of and look at, he said, without elaborating, and, of course, without looking at any of them. So that's the actual, on-the-ground reporting of what happened there. Everybody focused, of course, on the burning part, and they should. It's annoying and wrong and surprising. But, I find that interesting. So it's good news, though, that old white men and young Arab American men can find common ground when they need to. Bad news that it's about burning books, but, what are you going to do? You just got to take what you can get, I suppose. All right. Well, let's see. Lots of other interesting news to cover. Oh, yesterday we spoke about the unlikely event, the unlikeliness that Republicans would in fact be able to punish their 13, as they call them, defectors, the 13 Republicans in the House who voted for the infrastructure bill such that it was able to pass. And I guess the former guy spent some part of yesterday complaining about that and saying, being very explicit, by the way, in his usual, expression of considered thought on public policy. Yes, he wanted to have a $2 trillion infrastructure bill, but this was not something that people should be thanking the 13 Republicans for. You should be condemning them because you let Joe Biden have a win. Again, the quiet part out loud for him. And so, you had this movement on to punish the 13. But as we mentioned yesterday, it's not something that they can actually do. And it's really kind of amazing. So this morning I happened to see this tweet from Billy House, congressional correspondent for Bloomberg News, responding to the tweet of Andrew Solander from Axios, reporting that it wasn't going to happen. Andrew says, House GOP leadership is not expected to pursue formal punishment against the 13 House Republicans who voted for the infrastructure bill. 4 GOP aides tell Axios. We'll read that article so that we can dissect it at a finer level. But then we see Billy House tweeting, well, geez, what a huge, stunning surprise. They just now realized that not all of them were Trump impeach voters, such as their own former transportation chair, Don Young. What a nothing story from the beginning. They were never going to do this. And he's right. I'm just not certain whether he's right for the right reasons. And we're going to drag him over the coals to make sure that he gets right for the right reasons. In other words, I'm wondering whether Billy House thinks that what's preventing this from happening is that, well, no, we're not talking about Trump impeachment voters. You're talking about people including their own former Transportation Committee Chair, Don Young, some, respected elders and seriously conservative respected elders among the Republican conference anyway. But we don't know whether they respect their elders in the Republican conference because they're actually all pretty young, which is kind of amazing for Republicans. But, the newcomers, you got loudmouths, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Madison Cawthorn, Matt Gaetz, all screaming for this without any idea of what it actually entails. But I my fear is that maybe Billy House also says, well, they're not really going to do it because of the people involved here. You're not going to throw Don Young off the Transportation Committee. Well, you aren't, but more to the point is that you can't, and you were never able to. You never could have done this. As we described yesterday, it couldn't have happened without Democratic help. Not that I wouldn't have been willing to provide help, at least with some of it. As I said yesterday, I've been perfectly happy, as if I'm playing the role of a Democrat in the House, to vote yes on a resolution stripping these Republicans of their committee assignments. And by the way, I'm not certain at all that other Democrats would have joined me in that. They might very well have said, well, the norms of the way we do it. We let Republicans decide what they're going to do. Or, there might have been a lot of Democrats who would say, I'm not going to vote to remove them. I like some of these people. I like the fact that they came to the middle for this. We should be doing what we can to have the backs of moderate Republicans who will do the right thing in the right circumstances. Except then, I think you could temper that thinking by pointing out, you're talking about Don Young here. I mean, he's not a moderate Republican, and he's not going to be reliable in situations where you're looking for Republicans to do the right thing. I mean, just think about the impeachment. He did the wrong thing, didn't he? I mean, I don't know offhand what Don Young's position was. But it's funny that Billy House actually has maybe a backhanded entry into a good point here. They're not the impeachment voters. In other words, these are not responsible, moderate Republicans. These are Republicans who had a lot of money on the table and they went to take it. So that should be, taken into consideration too. But anyway, as I said, I might have been happy to vote yes to pass a resolution stripping those Republicans of their committee seats, because I would come right back and vote no on the Republican resolution naming their replacements. I would say if you want to strip people of their committee assignments and cut down the number of Republicans on various committees, I'd say, yeah, sure, you can do that. I'll even help you. But I'm not going to let you fill those seats. And if they came to me with a combination, with one resolution that says the following members are, removed from these committees and the following members are appointed to these committees, I would say, well, that's either a no vote for me, or I'd move to divide the question there and say, I think we ought to have separate votes on the removal and then the appointment of new members. I think if Republicans want to shoot themselves in the foot and have fewer members on the committee, I'm fine with that for the most part. So there might be one or two members that I feel bad about, but maybe not. But I'm not going to... I don't see why they should be able to put Jim Jordan in their place. No. I'm not going to help with that. Anyway, the real point here was that people didn't know what they were talking about, generally speaking. The threat to strip committee assignments from the 13 was made by people who don't know how that's done. They do not know how this works. That's why they made the threat. They don't know it. And or if they did know it, there was a cynical ploy to make the threat knowing that it couldn't be done. But unfortunately, it's also reported on by people who don't know how these things work. And so, they report it credulously, like it was something that really could happen. Even the Axios report that it's not going to happen makes it pretty plain that they don't know that it couldn't have. The headline is, this is the Axios piece, GOP spares infrastructure defectors. No, they didn't. I mean, this is made with a little, it's illustrated with a little sweating elephant logo, the GOP logo, and it's sweating off its brow here. It's a GIF. Anyway, GOP spares infrastructure defectors, but there was no way to punish them in the first place. But they gloss over it and they compare it to other things. And say, well, as people will say, well, what about Lynn Cheney? They did that to her. Lynn Cheney was removed from a Republican conference leadership position. You don't need Democratic help. In fact, you can't have Democratic help in removing somebody from a Republican conference leadership position. She wasn't stripped of her committee assignments. We're all watching her on the January 6th committee. Right? So, duh. The 13 House Republicans who voted for the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill aren't expected to face formal punishment from their party's leadership, despite anger. And, look, there was anger. We have to cover it, right? Despite anger from some colleagues, 4 GOP aides tell Axios. Also, the facts tell Axios. Why it matters. Liz Cheney was ousted from her leadership position. Remember, this is the why it matters. We're savvy. Here's why it matters. Liz Cheney was removed after voting to impeach former President Trump. She now serves as vice chair of the January 6th Select Committee. Aides said the bulk of House Republican ire is more concentrated on her and others who voted to impeach Trump. That is not why it matters. And to the extent that Liz Cheney matters in this, it is to illustrate what actually happened to Liz Cheney, which is actually something Republicans can unilaterally do. Removing somebody from a committee is not. The right-wing House Freedom Caucus has sponsored a resolution to expel Cheney and Representative Adam Kinzinger, and Kinzinger is the other Republican on the January 6th panel. So the right-wing House Freedom Caucus has sponsored a resolution to expel Cheney and Kinzinger from the GOP conference. I presume this is not a House resolution because the House doesn't have any say over who's in the GOP conference. It could be a resolution of the GOP conference that they'll vote on, and that's something, again, that they can do internally. You can kick people out of the party because it's up to the party. You just can't kick them off of committees because that's an act of the House. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has avoided holding a vote on it, that resolution, I gather, for the GOP conference. Now, if they have a floor motion on it, I'd kind of almost like to see them bring that just so that they learn the lesson. That's not how these things work. Driving the news, several Trump allies in the House, as well as the former president himself, have openly bashed the 13 Republicans. Their votes proved vital after 6 progressive House Democrats voted against the infrastructure bill. In fact, of course, that is backwards. Their votes proved vital after House Democrats or before House Democrats voted against the infrastructure bill. The House Democrats, for the most part, were probably asked to stand aside with their no votes until they saw what the result was, and then they were released to do it. So, missing that point entirely. The no thank you goes to those in the House and Senate who voted for the Democrats' non-infrastructure bill. This is the Trump quote. Also known as the Democrat Presidential Re-election Bill. That's what he said. Where was he? At the National Republican Congressional Committee dinner in Tampa, Florida. You gave Biden a victory. Oh no, boo-hoo.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Alright, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I ain't done yelling at the people at Axios who wrote this. I don't know how much I blame them, but honestly, if you're going to cover Congress, figure out how it works. But whatever, Okay, we don't know everything. Nobody does. So fine. Moving on. Yes, we missed the chance to do the Trump impression in reading the quote. No thank you goes to those in the House and Senate. But anyway, you all understand this. You gave Biden a victory as his poll numbers were falling off a cliff. Never mind that, the country could use some infrastructure investment. So, maybe just take a pass on this one. It's not even a big L for you. So, whatever. Anyway, back to the anger and the drive to get in the news by saying you're going to strip people of their committee assignments. Right-wing Representative Matt Gaetz has called on McCarthy to strip them of their committee assignments, although it is not in McCarthy's power to do so, though he would presumably be the one who would present the resolution on the House floor, stripping them of those committee assignments, if he were to agree to do such a thing. So the call isn't a bad idea. Just thinking it will work is. If we tolerate this dissension from these 13, they'll do it again, he said on Steve Bannon's podcast. It's an interesting concept, by the way. Of course, if we tolerate the insurrection from the people on this podcast, they'll do it again. He's right about that. Multiple rank-and-file members share that view and hope to launch an effort to oust them from their respective committees, Punchbowl News first reported. So we should read Punchbowl News's report on it, too, and see whether they also credulously, is that right, the word, believe that this is something that can actually happen. I mean, it got said, so it was interesting to report, but, you might have put in the report somewhere, by the way, they can't actually do this, or it's extraordinarily unlikely that they'd be able to pull it off. Certainly not without Democratic cooperation. McCarthy's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Between the lines, time to get savvy, right? That position is confined to a small group, according to the aides. Representative Don Young of Alaska, one of the targeted 13, hopes to be in attendance when President Biden signs the bill into law on Monday. Young spokesman Zach Brown told Axios. Several others in the targeted group are unsure whether they'll go if invited. Representative Andrew Garbarino of New York has ruled it out, his spokesperson told Axios. He wants to keep his head down, I guess. What they're saying, Brown, the Young spokesperson, said, sure, a few vocal members have used social media to draw attention to the 13 Republican yes votes, but their tweets and cable news attention doesn't represent a real effort to retaliate. A handful of rabble-rousers are frustrated, but this isn't serious, nor is leadership involved, Brown added. Another Republican leadership aide said it's probably a few disgruntled members, calling the effort a bunch of nothing. A third aide says the House Republican leadership has indicated that it is not supportive of removing infrastructure supporters from committee assignments. It doesn't really get around to why it could never happen, but it does say that it won't happen. But you got to come here, I guess, for that. I don't know why they won't tell you. All right, let's see. I clicked through to the Punch Bowl thing, and I don't know if this brings me to today's Punch Bowl news as opposed to yesterday's. No, here it is. Here's some news, the way they report it. The GOP leadership is bracing for rank-and-file lawmakers to attempt to strip committee assignments from the 13 Republican lawmakers who voted for the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. Probably not. Several of these lawmakers are also ranking members, top Republicans on committees, and those could be at risk too. Now, that's something they can do. They can decline to nominate the top Republicans as ranking members next year if Republicans remain in the minority, or threaten not to nominate them as committee chairs if Republicans win the majority back. And then, of course, then they can do whatever they want when they win the majority back. They could strip them of those committee assignments next year. I guess 2 years from now. But I don't know that they'll stay mad that long. Or some of the people who are angry about this and say they're going to drive the process might also not be in Congress by that point. There's also that. A number of GOP lawmakers were upset by the fact that several of their Republican colleagues voted early for the infrastructure package. Greg mentioned why they would have done that, helping Democrats cross the majority threshold on a key piece of President Joe Biden's legislative agenda and undermining their party strategy. Much of the anger is directed at Representative John Katko of New York, who voted early for the legislation. Katko is the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, and he told multiple lawmakers on the House floor that he had seen Jim Banks on television talking about the infrastructure bill, and he was voting early. That's the guy who got mad. This isn't the first controversy involving Katko this year. Katko reached an agreement with Homeland Security Chairman Benny Thompson to create a bipartisan commission to investigate the January 6th, investigate the January 6th insurrection. This is interesting. First of all, it wasn't a commission, it was a committee. Second of all, what it actually says here is just a typo, I think, is that he reached an agreement with Benny Thompson to create a bipartisan commission to investigate the January 6th commission, which he might actually vote for at some point, but not at this moment in time. That's not what he did. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy later rejected the proposal, but 35 House Republicans ended up voting for the bill. Katko also voted to impeach former President Donald Trump following the January 6th insurrection, and he supported a criminal contempt referral against former Trump aide Steve Bannon for failing to comply with the subpoena for the Select Committee investigating the Capitol attack. Beyond Katko, several of the members who voted for the package hold ranking member posts on full committees or subcommittees. For instance, Don Young, Dean of the House, ranking member of Natural Resources at the moment, Representatives Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania and David McKinley of West Virginia hold subcommittee ranking spots. 3 of the 13 are retiring: Tom Reed of New York, Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, and Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio. There have been other disputes inside the House GOP conference this Congress over how members voted. Liz Cheney mentioned again, but will they please tell people that it was a different situation? Let's find out. Liz Cheney, of course, GOP conference chair, voted to impeach Trump as well. Cheney was able to fend off the first attempt to oust her by Trump loyalists, but following her continued public criticism of the former president, Cheney was forced out. Representative Elise Stefanik of New York replaced her in the leadership. In this case, There was never a doubt that Republican leadership was against the infrastructure bill. McCarthy tried to keep the GOP vote total down, but there were always going to be enough Republicans to help pass the legislation. There was no way McCarthy could keep the total to just a handful of votes. Yet, and 13 is kind of a handful. But those 13 votes gave Speaker Nancy Pelosi some breathing room on the final tally, especially when the squad voted against the bill. They did so, of course, because they were able to. McCarthy's strategy had been to wait until the Democrats reached 218 votes before Republicans cast their votes, making Pelosi and other Democratic leaders carry it on their own. But Katko and the others blew that up. There's a lingering feeling of betrayal. Check out this tweet, they say, from the House Republican Conference. It's been the subject of a lot of chatter inside GOP circles during the last few days, and it says this: a vote for the Democrats' quote infrastructure bill, quote infrastructure, unquote bill, is a vote for their socialist wish list. Americans won't forget. Well, they will, and it's dumb. The House GOP conference removed this tweet just after it was posted. You can see why this may anger people who are going to vote for the bill. Fitzpatrick, who voted for the bill, was particularly peeved about this tweet, sources told us. The tweet was removed before it was a bigger problem inside the conference, but again, there was no secret where GOP leadership was on this bill. Yeah, if I pay my conference dues to you, you're going to call me a socialist? That's not great. And they got people to got them to take it down. But anyway, some Republicans, including hardliners like Trader Green, Gates, and Boebert, publicly called for retaliation against the 13 Republicans who backed the bill. And there are ways to retaliate. It's just stripping them of their committee assignments is not one of them. Our friend Manu Raju of CNN tweeted this last night after MTG called them, quote, traitors, of all people to call them traitors, and tweeted the numbers of the 13 who had voted for the infrastructure. Upton said on CNN he received threats of violence. It's a real step back, but I have a colleague, as you know, that put the phone numbers of the 13 of us that voted that way. Well, they are publicly available, but whatever. The Punch Bowl, this is now on to internal news for Punch Bowl itself. Okay, but still no mention. I'm pretty disappointed that they really can't seem to figure out, how this stuff really works. And it's bothersome, and maybe they think it's small potatoes, but it's not, because you can't really, report on this stuff. You certainly can't, walk around thinking you're being a really savvy reporter on it when you don't notice this part of the story, at least in my view. But anyway, that's why you're here. Hope you enjoyed the analysis. All right, let's see. Other things that we should share with you here. The most interesting and relevant stuff. What would be the best way of using our last couple of minutes? Here's an interesting follow-up to the story I mentioned the other day, and then I don't think I found the right tweet, but I mentioned to you that Congresswoman Malliotakis from Staten Island, am I right about that, who had tweeted that, or tried to claim credit for the infrastructure bill for Donald Trump. But as you know, Donald Trump decided to go the other way on this thing. And so it's another frog and scorpion situation, I guess, is he loves to tell that story. But just, don't associate with yourself with Donald Trump. You're going to get yourself killed, right? So Brian Beutler notices this one and tweets it out under the standard meme format of how it started, how it's going. First one being Representative Malliotakis credits Trump for infrastructure getting done. And the quote from her appearance on TV, President Trump laid the groundwork for this infrastructure to pass. I'm happy and appreciative to President Trump for being one of the first to talk about the need for infrastructure. Now, of course, we've talked about the need for infrastructure since the invention of infrastructure. But whatever. She's trying to give him credit. But just like with the vaccines, you try to give him credit, and then he tries to take credit, and then the crowd boos, so he runs away from it and says the vaccine sucks. Similarly, same with infrastructure. I mean, he could have just stuck with the story of, I said all along I wanted a $2 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, he walked away from that, but so what? It's a lie about that. Anyway, Malliotakis goes out there and tries to give him credit. Tries to be a pro-Trump person about it too. But it doesn't work because New York City Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, quote, appeared visibly shaken as Trump railed against her and the other Republican House members who voted for the infrastructure bill, as reported by the New York Post and tweeted by Bill Gruskin, who may or may not be associated with the New York Post. I don't know, because it's just a screenshot. It's not the actual tweet, and I can't click through. But thanks to the eagle eye there. Thanks for the eagle eye to Brian Beutler for putting that one together. I thought that was of some considerable interest. Let's see. So good follow-up there. Plus, of course, it gives you now a source for what I said yesterday, that Malliotakis was trying to credit Trump. And then I think I put another Malliotakis clip in the collection of stories that I gave to Scott and didn't actually prove the point, but that was small potatoes. But now we got it. We followed up on that. Let's see. Right. Well, there was all sorts of other stuff of great interest. Let me see. A few things to share here. What do we have time for on this one? Oh, I really wanted to, do I read the rest of the story of John McEntee from yesterday? Maybe I ought to. The other thing I thought I'd share with you is about John Eastman and the continuing investigation by the January 6th committee into what was going on at the Willard Hotel. That was reported on in the last day or so in the New York Times. They're getting into detail about that. I'm going to jump back to that Atlantic thing from Jonathan Karl, although they'll probably say I read another article and count it against me for the month. But we were only just starting to get to the part about Johnny McEntee, and how outrageous his appointment to the head of the office of, what was it, the Presidential Personnel Office, is that right, PPO, and how outrageous it was and how underqualified he was and how he was using the office for his various personal projects, one being the one that Donald Trump wanted him to do, which was running the internal loyalty police, but two, the one he wanted to do, which was filling his office staff with the most, with the best looking 21-year-old women he could find, plus any guys that got hired had to be geeks so that they wouldn't be competition for the women. So, that was pretty amazing too. And we were just getting to the beginning of the really, disturbing part here. Where were we? Let's see. I'll scroll down. Oh yes, and of course, just a reminder, remember that Johnny got himself fired from the White House by then Chief of Staff John Kelly after the FBI finally got around to saying, oh yeah, we have to do a background check on this guy because he's the body man for the president. And then they found out, oh, he's like a gambler. That's terrible for blackmail possibilities. He certainly should have said something about that. He didn't tell us. It's a big security violation. And Chief of Staff John Kelly says, you're fired. Then Kelly gets fired. And Trump says, bring back the guy with the gambling debts. I like having him around. Probably because he can blackmail him. Anyway, let's see. So he has a fight with the rest of his staff over hiring him as the head of the Presidential Personnel Office. Then we find, of course, okay, McEntee told the president exactly what he wanted to hear, which is why he wanted him back, right? That his political problems were caused by people who pretended to support him but were really against him. The secret never-Trumpers right there in his administration. It was time to root out the deep state. Yeah, one of those guys. McEntee began scouring federal agencies for people who didn't support all things Trump. Beginning in June 2020, in the middle of both the pandemic and the presidential campaign, the Personnel Office informed virtually every senior official across the federal government, regardless of how long they had worked in the administration, that they would need to sit down for a job interview. Everybody's getting reviewed now, right? We did read this part. This is part of the setup. And but by the way, also I just want to throw in there the story this article begins with, remember, is the one where the White House Chief of Staff gets called out of Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearing in the Senate to take a phone call from part of McEntee's operation, saying, we just found out. The White House Chief of Staff has to take this call. We found out that a mid-level staffer liked a Taylor Swift post on Instagram. That's what they were spending their time on. And it was so serious. The president, Donald Trump, that idiot, took McEntee's project so seriously that the White House Chief of Staff felt like he had to take this call or he'd be on the outs with Trump and get fired. That's amazing. Don't forget that part. So where are we? Yes. So now he's going to interview everybody. And as we said yesterday, a president has a right to expect that his political appointees support his policies and will carry them out, right? These are, after all, political appointees. But most of the people McEntee's team questioned were already devoted to Trump. They were still putting their reputations on the line to work for him 3.5 years into his administration, when everybody knew that everything Trump touches dies. But that wasn't enough for the loyalty enforcers. McEntee's underlings were, for the most part, comically inexperienced. This is where we find out about him hiring the most beautiful 21-year-old girls, he says girls, you could find, and then a bunch of geeks among the guys so that there wouldn't be any competition. And they said it was the Rockettes and the Dungeons and Dragons group, right? In fact, one McEntee hire was literally a Rockette. She had, in fact, performed with the Radio City Music Hall's finest in the 2019 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. The only work experience listed on her resume besides a White House internship was a stint as a dance instructor. Probably pretty good at it. McEntee also hired Instagram influencers to vet cabinet officials. Cameron Kinsey, for example, was 20 and still in college when McEntee gave her the title of External Relations Director. Why not? If you want to find out how that happened, I guess go Google Cameron, Camryn, of course, Cameron Kinsey, and see if you can figure out what makes her an influencer and how she caught McEntee's eye. Mind you, he's 30 at this point. In an interview with the online publication The Conservateur, she said, "Only in Trump's America could I go from working in a gym to working in the White House, because that's the American dream." She might not sound like that. Kinsey went on to work at the pro-Trump One America News Network after this, by the way. The interviews with McEntee's team usually lasted about an hour. They included questions such as, and this one struck me as so funny, not only are they doing the stupid thing, but they realize, we now realize, they didn't know how to write an interview question. So on top of their being incompetent to this task, just by virtue of having no experience, when they finally call everybody in and say, "You're going to answer to me." All right, I guess. Why not? What's your question? Do you support the policies of the Trump administration? If you had stopped there, that would be, it's pretty blunt, but it's kind of a waste of time too, right? But I love the follow-up. And if so, which ones? You're supposed to select some. Oh, does that mean you don't support all of them? The correct answer is all, obviously. But it's the sort of thing that somebody who's like, I don't know how to write an interview question, but I kind of remember being asked questions at some point in school. So do you support I want to know if they support the policies of the Trump administration. But that's too open-ended a question, or too blunt or dumb a question. So I'll add the intellectual sounding, and if so, which ones? That's what a smart person asks. That question was actually asked of Machan, M-A-K-A-N, I don't know, Machan Delrahim, the head of the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division. As the person carrying out the president's antitrust policies, he found the question strange. He probably said, do I support the policies of the Trump administration? Yeah. If so, which ones? The antitrust ones, I guess? I don't know. Officials at the Environmental Protection Agency and HUD were asked, do you support the president's plan to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan? A lot to unpack in that one. It was a bizarre question, given that neither official had anything remotely to do with Afghanistan policy. Again, this is for EPA and HUD people. They asked, what about that? Do you support the president's proposal to remove all troops from Afghanistan? By the way, when all the troops were removed from Afghanistan, they went crazy. Oh, how could you be removing troops from Afghanistan? Didn't you know that was going to spell trouble? DOJ spokesperson Carrie Kupich. We've called her name on the show in the past. Well, she had one of these interviews. Miss Big Shot did, and she was asked, "What are your political inclinations?" These people are dumber even than she is. She's laughing at them. She says, a little amused, she responded, "Are you asking if I'm a Republican?" Which, of course, is a Hatch Act violation, and you're not supposed to be able to ask those questions. And we had a whole U.S. attorney's scandal about that, 15 years ago? 10 years ago? 10. Less than 10? I don't remember how many years ago. Figure it out. Anyway, and maybe it is more than 10 at this point. Not supposed to be doing that, but also, I mean, that's your question for the DOJ spokesperson. What are your political inclinations? I think people know them. But there's more. McEntee's enforcers scoured the social media accounts and voting records of officials high and low. An office assistant at the DOJ was asked to explain why she had voted in a local Democratic primary a few years earlier. Huh? How come? She explained, because it's effing America. But no, she explained that her parents had told her that's where her vote would count most because the Democratic primary winner was all but certain to win the general election. Nevertheless, after the interview, she was denied a promotion and a raise that she had been eligible to receive. Punished for effing around in the Democratic primary, which, by the way, Republicans love to do all the time. I wonder if they would have accepted that answer. McEntee took a particular interest in one job category, White House liaisons to cabinet agencies. Traditionally, the liaison job is a mid-level position responsible for coordinating messages between the agencies and the White House. But McEntee didn't want messengers. McEntee wanted people who would boss around the senior officials and report back to him. In early November 2020, he installed a conservative activist named Heidi Stirrup as liaison at DOJ. Stirrup was primarily known as an anti-abortion activist who had worked as a mid-level staffer for Republicans in Congress. She had no legal experience, but she was intensely loyal to Trump and to McEntee. Her car was easy to spot in the DOJ parking lot. It was covered with Trump bumper stickers, which is unusual at a department where even the most political of political appointees try to appear to be above the fray. A few days after the election, in her first full day at the office, right, she's brand new, after the election, first full day at the office, she went in to meet a senior official on Attorney General Bill Barr's team. It didn't go well. "You need to wake up to the fact this election is being stolen," she screamed. "It needs to be stopped." The Atlantic, it says, was not able to reach Stirrup for comment. Barr's team saw Stirrup as more than just annoying. They worried she would snoop into DOJ investigations. This would have been highly unethical. The White House is not supposed to interfere in criminal cases. The next time Stirrup came around to berate the senior official, he asked her if she would like to deliver the message directly to the Attorney General. And with that, he brought her in to see Barr. Now, most people find Barr intimidating, apparently, but not Heidi Stirrup. "The election's being stolen," she lectured him. "You need better people doing these investigations." And she told him she had a list of people, presumably provided by McEntee, whom he needed to hire. Barr later told me he'd never seen this kind of behavior. By the end of the week, he had ordered her banned from the DOJ building. Her pass was deactivated, and security was instructed not to let her in. How do you like that? Well, there's a little more. I'll squeeze one more in here. A similar run-in between a White House liaison and senior leadership had taken place at the Department of Homeland Security a few months earlier. McEntee had installed Josh Whitehouse, a 25-year-old Trump supporter from New Hampshire, at DHS, and Whitehouse immediately started throwing his weight around, as if he had any, often threatening to fire people, although he had no direct authority to do so. Two people who worked with Whitehouse on the second floor at DHS headquarters told me his mood swings were so wild that they worried he could get violent. He was overheard screaming things into the phone, such as, "If they don't do this, I will literally go to their house and burn it down." You can't say that. Why is the FBI not investigating that guy? Whitehouse said the quote sounded, quote, exaggerated, and he didn't think he had said it. As one DHS official told me, "I was legitimately worried he was going to come and kill us." When I asked Whitehouse about this comment, he told me, "They need help." He added, "I can't imagine anybody should be afraid of another person working there if they are in it for the right reason and aligned with the agenda. That actually sounds pretty threatening as well. Add some horror dramatic to that one. In mid-August of 2020, White House had a loud confrontation with acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf in front of several witnesses. It happened after Miles Taylor, a former chief of staff at DHS, you remember him, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post criticizing Trump. Taylor wrote that the country is less secure as a direct result of the president's actions, and he would be crossing party lines to vote for Joe Biden. So what does he do? Because he's X at that point, right? Now, there are plaques in the office that include the names of all the past secretaries of Homeland Security and their chiefs of staff, each engraved on a metal plate. After the op-ed, White House set out to remove Taylor's name. He was in the process of, he's doing it himself, unscrewing the plate when Wolf walks by. What are you doing? I am removing the name of this traitor. Stop. That doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me. And we don't erase history here at the Department of Homeland Security. That's like the best thing Chad Wolf ever said. White House erupted at the cabinet secretary. Miles Taylor is a traitor. This just shows you don't really support President Trump. Or this just shows you don't. All right. Anyway, by the fall, White House would be reassigned to a more important job, White House liaison at the Pentagon. When the move was announced, he told people, I'm going to the Pentagon to fire Mark Esper and those deep state bastards. But before he left, he had one piece of unfinished business. At a moment when he saw that Secretary Wolf was out of the building, he once again went over to the list of names, removed Miles Taylor's plate, and flipped it over, didn't destroy it, but flipped it over so the metal face was blank before screwing it back onto the wall. There's actually more to the story, not that much more, but his confrontation with Esper is reported on. More about McEntee and his stupid memo. It's an amazing piece. You could read it and marvel at it forever, but we're not going to do that. We're going to let Justice Putnam enter the studio, the fake studio, and take over for us now.
Listening to Kagro in the morning.
I'm talking over.
With David Waldman.
But you know what we're waiting for. We're waiting for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Networks Radio. And as always, I've left a number of stories out that really have to be reported on, but you can always rely on Justice to round them up for you. He's got the usual assortment from around the country and around the world, and it's all coming up next. Stay tuned.